Welcome to the Odds Breakers, number one place for shared, sharp betting information.
Welcome back to the Odds Breakers, playing the odds NASCAR style, an oval experience. I am your host, Paul Napier, and you can connect with me on Twitter at NASCAR Style Odds. This episode is being sponsored by 5dimes.eu. For a reduced juice bonus, visit theoddsbreakers.com/5dimes and click on the banner to get better lines than the average sports books. This week we have a great show for you, with info you need to know before making picks. This is episode 10, can you believe it, of the Oval Experience. Each week we will go into last week's race and track facts, maybe some history, trends, and what to look for before placing bets. First off, before I get into this, I want to give a quick shout out to Kiev for allowing me to continue this NASCAR handicapping podcast on his network of the Odds Breakers. So thank you, Kiev. But enough of that. We need to get back to playing the odds NASCAR style. Hey, let's go back to Martinsville. Martinsville ended up being a real snooze fest. Until about 50 to go. But I want to start with about 100 laps to go. And here's where the picks were at that point. The Larson versus JJ pick was done. JJ had issues and Larson was still on the lead lap. And let's see here. We had William Byron. He was in third while Bowman the Showman was clear back in 26th. Not looking good there either. Next up, we had Hamlin, who was in fourth, while Logano was in fifth. Not too bad, I don't think. Let's focus on that Hamlin versus Logano. Now, these two were around each other for at least the last 150 laps at this point. Nose to tail or side by side. When finally, with about 45 laps to go, the 22 who had been having runs off of each corner, probably for the past 8 to 10 laps at this point, has a run on the outside coming off of 4. When the 11 turns right and pushes the 22 up the wall, cutting a tire down. Now, this pick's not looking good either. But, on the other hand, I have a good feeling these two are going to have a confrontation after the race. So, let's also talk about this real quick. You know, Logano has had issues with too many guys at the paperclip. You know, if you remember back, he had the issue with Kenseth. He's had the issue last year with Truex, and now Hamlin. So, you know, this is not a good pattern the guy has at short tracks to keep continuously getting into these confrontations. If you look at this also, it was interesting the way that Hamlin put it, you know, in his post-race interview, where it sounded like, you know, Logano wanted to fight him, and then he pushes him and runs away, making me think that Logano is a little bit of a coward. And he hides behind that smile, maybe. So the race winds down, and your top 5 were Truex Jr., who led a race-leading 464 out of 500 laps. William Byron came in second, Keselowski third, Hamlin stayed there in fourth, and Ryan Blaney in fifth. Now, another side note, Keselowski came back to me and ran a really good race. I hope we did spotlight him a little bit last week. I did not jump on any of his matchups that he had, but it probably would have been a good day for you if you did. It's tricky to pick these guys that have gotten pushed out of the playoffs. And again, another thing is, if you go back, this was a wild card race. So I go 0-3, but all of my wagers were small. Remember, this is a 36 race season, not including the All-Star race and the shootout and those races. And so this is really, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So keep those things in mind when you have, or if you're going off of some of the stuff that I've shared with you, you know, it kind of makes things a little bit easier to swallow when you do have an off week, as long as you're smart about how that you are placing your bets. And one final thing with Martinsville.
And short track racing.
So on to Texas. This week, the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series heads to the 1.5-mile Texas Motor Speedway, located in Fort Worth, Texas. First fun fact is the speedway actually measures 1.44 miles after the reconfiguration. NASCAR keeps it for the record purposes of 1.5 miles. This track is a quad oval, and that will play into some of the wrecks at this track this weekend. The transitions are difficult, and the turns are long, and because of this, the wall will tend to reach out and bite drivers, especially when they come off of turn 2. This track has been home to 2 races in the series since 2005. Since then, the track has held this late spot in November for their second race. This week's race is the, and I use air quotes here, safest race of the 3 in this round. I think because this is an intermediate track and should have less cautions and wrecks than Martinsville and Phoenix that is looming on the horizon for next week. Let's look at this week's drivers to look for at the Texas Motor Speedway. And our first driver we're going to highlight is Kevin Harvick. He has an average finish of 3.2 in his last 5, 2 wins, 4 top 5s, 5 top 10s. Joey Logano, during that same time, has a average finish of 7.2, 2 top 5s and 4 top 10s. Kurt Busch has a average finish during that time of 8.4. Eric Jones has an average finish of 8.8, while Chase Elliott has an average finish of 9.4. Now, the only guy there that has any wins that I mentioned there of those 5 is Kevin Harvick with those 2 wins. He has actually won the last 2 November races at this track. Yes, there was the controversy that I believe he was too low during, I believe it was 2 years ago race at that track. May have been last year. This does say a lot about, this race and he and Rodney Childers, I think. He may be in the list of free picks this week. Another guy that is good there, of course, is Kyle Busch. He has one of those wins in the last 5, and he also has an average finish of 12.4. But this is a track that he and the likes of Martin Truex Jr., who is right below him with an average finish of 13.6 during his last 5, I won't say is a struggle, but it's not their typical strong showing at these intermediate tracks that the Joe Gibbs cars have had. Looking at that, I don't know what it is. Is it the fact that it is, like I said, it is a quad oval. Those turns are long, and it is, a lot of guys try to run that wall, and for whatever reason, a lot of times it will bite you, like I said. The shortest way to go around the bottom of this track seems like it is the right way to go. I look at it sort of a little bit like Atlanta. Harvick is very good there as well. Another guy that has a win there is Jimmy Johnson. Don't look at him. And finally, Denny Hamlin also has a win there in his last 5. But his average finish, again, is 18.6. That might be a guy that I stay away from. Okay, so here on the flip side of that, who do we stay away from? This will probably shock a lot of people when I have this person in Kyle Larson. He has an average finish in his last 5 of 23.8. He does, however, have 2 top 5s. Now, what about those other 3 races? Accidents, all of them. He's been checkers or wreckers. And I think this goes back to, if you go back and if you look at those last 5 races, he tries to run that high line. And again, these are the longest sweeping corners of any 1.5 mile track in NASCAR. And the concentration level is, unreal. And these guys are professionals. However, accidents happen. He's also led 74 laps during that time. So it tells you he's been good. However, he's just, tried to stay at that top line a little bit too much. That brings me to this week's free pick. And this week's free pick, try to stay with me here. a little bit different, but we're going to do something a little bit different, I guess. I'm looking at the matchup of Kyle Busch at minus 145 versus Chase Elliott at plus 115. Now, of course, I love plus money bets, plus money lines, and this is no exception here. But I'm looking at this a little bit differently this week, and I'm going to dig in a little bit different, or deeper, I guess. So I'm looking at the overall averages of the two drivers, and Chase Elliott over his last 5 has an average of 9.4 at Texas, while Kyle Busch has an average of 12.4 over those same races. Next, if I look at those last 5 races, Chase Elliott holds a slight advantage of head-to-head matchups between Elliott and Busch of 3-2. And if I dig even deeper and look at the last 3 November races at Texas Motor Speedway, Chase Elliott in a head-to-head matchup would win them all versus Kyle Busch. Overall, I would give a slight advantage to Elliott in this matchup. Both drivers did not have a particularly good opening round to the playoffs at Martinsville, and they need a bounce back. But I think Chase Elliott needs a little bit more of a bounce back since he's sitting there in 8th, I believe, right now. And for those reasons, I am taking Chase Elliott in a 10-unit wager in this head-to-head matchup to defeat Kyle Busch. One more matchup, just as a FYI heads up, is the matchup of Kevin Harvick versus Kyle Busch. Same odds right now. Kyle Busch is at minus 145 and Kevin Harvick is at plus 115. And if you remember back earlier in the show, I highlighted that Kevin Harvick has the best record here at Texas Motor Speedway of the current drivers in the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series. Want more info and free picks for this week's race? Visit theoddsbreakers.com and click on the link for this week's race. If you like what you heard, shoot me a message on Twitter at NASCAR Style Odds. Thank you for subscribing, downloading, and listening to Playing the Odds NASCAR Style. Until next week, keep researching, keep winning, and have fun.